Meet General William Westmoreland, the architect of America's strategy in the Vietnam War. Commanding with an iron will from 1964 to 1968, he aimed to crush the Viet Cong through sheer force, believing in victory through attrition. Yet, the war's tide turned with the Battle of Khe Sanh and the Tet Offensive, as the home front's morale plummeted and South Vietnamese support wavered. Despite battlefield dominance, Westmoreland's war of numbers faced a harsh verdict, a nation questioning its cost and a general's legacy overshadowed by the specter of defeat. This is the story of William Westmoreland, the man who lost the Vietnam War. The rise of William Westmoreland. William Westmoreland's journey begins in the vibrant heart of Spartanburg County, South Carolina, where he was born to Eugenia Tally Childs and James Ripley Westmoreland. Raised in a family deeply rooted in local banking and textiles, young William's path to greatness was set ablaze early on. At a mere 15 years old, he soared to Eagle Scout status at Troop 1 Boy Scouts, a feat that garnered him prestigious accolades like the Distinguished Eagle Scout Award and the coveted Silver Buffalo from the Boy Scouts of America. This early display of leadership and determination hinted at an extraordinary future awaiting him. After a year at the Citadel in 1932, he got a spot at the United States Military Academy thanks to Senator James F. Burns, a family friend. His curiosity about the world led him to West Point. He was part of an esteemed class that included notable names like Creighton Abrams and Benjamin O. Davis, Jr. Graduating as first captain, the highest cadet rank, he was honored with the Pershing Sword for military excellence. Aside from his military prowess, Westmoreland played a role in the Protestant Sunday school teachers' leadership. Following graduation in 1936, he delved into artillery roles at Fort Sill and Schofield Barracks, Hawaii. In World War II, he showcased his skills in Tunisia, Sicily, France, and Germany, rising to the rank of colonel and becoming chief of staff of the 9th Infantry Division. Post-war, he underwent airborne training, leading the 504th Parachute Infantry Regiment and serving as Chief of Staff for the 82nd Airborne Division. His journey continued with roles at the Army Command and General Staff College, the Army War College, and commanding the 187th Airborne Regiment Combat Team in Korea. He even dabbled in a management program at the Harvard Business School. Not just a military man, Westmoreland also served as the U.S. Army Secretary of the General Staff, commanded the 101st Airborne Division, and held positions like Superintendent of the United States Military Academy and Commander of the 18th Airborne Corps. In recognition of his achievements, he became an honorary member of the Massachusetts Society of Cincinnati in 1962. The Battle for Vietnam. The post-World War II period saw France attempting to regain control over Vietnam, leading to a significant defeat at the Battle of Dien Bien Phu. The Geneva Conference aimed to address the conflict in Indochina and temporarily divided Vietnam into two zones. The Northern Zone, under Viet Minh's governance, and the Southern Zone, under the state of Vietnam, led by former Emperor Bao Dai. The conference's final declaration proposed a general election by July of 1956 to unify Vietnam, but this plan was met with opposition from the state of Vietnam and the United States. The divide deepened as communist nations like China and the Soviet Union supported the North, while the United States and other non-communist nations backed the South. When William Westmoreland assumed command in South Vietnam, the idea of a Korea-style settlement with a demilitarized zone was already dismissed by the U.S. government. Instead, the focus was on achieving a decisive victory without escalating resources significantly, given concerns about Chinese intervention. The challenge of North Vietnamese forces infiltrating the South couldn't be resolved through aggressive measures against the North due to fears of Chinese involvement. However, President Lyndon B. Johnson had committed to supporting South Vietnam against the Communist North. Over time, leaders like Chief of Staff Harold Keith Johnson and historians like Harry G. Summers Jr. recognized the inconsistency in U.S. goals. To defeat the Communists would require a national emergency and full mobilization of U.S. resources, a move seen as mutually conflicting with the initial objectives. General Johnson had strong opinions about how General Westmoreland approached his role. He felt Westmoreland was too focused on pleasing government officials, which he saw as a flaw in his leadership style. But you see, Westmoreland was just following the Army's old rules of listening to civilian leaders. One significant challenge during this time was the fear of Chinese involvement, which led to a strategic defensive approach. Despite this, President Lyndon Johnson emphasized the importance of defending Vietnam, creating tension between defensive strategies and broader commitments. The military strategy was influenced by experts who transitioned from academia to government roles. These experts were particularly interested in nuclear weapons, believing they made traditional warfare less relevant. Additionally, there was a growing emphasis on counterinsurgency tactics, which downplayed the importance of conventional warfare. After the Korean War, Americans were used to wars ending with the enemy surrendering completely. But then came the Gulf of Tonkin incident on August 2nd of 1964, which pushed America to jump into the Vietnam War full throttle, sending nearly 200,000 troops by the year's end. Westmoreland found himself facing a tricky situation due to the strategies and structures of both the Viet Cong and the North Vietnamese Army. On one side, there were regular North Vietnamese troops sneaking in across the borders, gearing up for a large attack. Westmoreland saw this as an urgent threat. Meanwhile, the Viet Cong had dug deep into the populated coastal areas, causing constant trouble through guerrilla tactics. Westmoreland, taking a cue from Robert McNamara's love for numbers, focused a lot on body counts and used the Battle of La Drang to show that the communists were losing ground. But the government, keen on winning without heavy losses, got worried when McNamara's data hinted at possible big American casualties. This made them rethink what was realistically achievable in the war. The turning point in Vietnam's turmoil. The Battle of La Drang stands out as a unique event during the Vietnam War. It marked a significant moment when U.S. troops confronted a large enemy force head-on. General Johnson, after consulting with junior officers, began to doubt the effectiveness of localized short-term search-and-destroy missions. This was because the communist forces had the upper hand in choosing when and where to engage in combat, often avoiding confrontations with U.S. forces if they deemed it advantageous. The option of conducting sustained pacification operations across the entire country, which would have required a massive deployment of U.S. troops, was never a feasible choice for General Westmoreland due to political considerations. Despite this challenge, he maintained a positive outlook on the progress of the war in public. However, journalist James Reston and other critics believe that Westmoreland's strategy of attrition warfare misrepresented his leadership abilities. When General Creighton Abrams took over, there was a deliberate shift away from attrition tactics. Abrams' initial operations showed tactical success in disrupting North Vietnamese activities, but events like the Battle of Hamburger Hill proved to be politically damaging. This limited Abrams' freedom to continue similar large-scale operations. In 1963, Westmoreland was deployed to Vietnam, and by January of 1964, he took on the role of Deputy Commander at Military Assistance Command, Vietnam, MACV. His reputation caught the attention of Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara, who praised him to President Lyndon B. Johnson in April, saying Westmoreland was the best we have without question. At the helm of MACV, Westmoreland gained fame for his optimistic outlook on the U.S. military's performance in Vietnam, which received considerable media coverage. However, over time, the growth of communist forces in the South prompted frequent requests for more U.S. troops. When Westmoreland arrived, there were 16,000 troops, but by 1968, when he became Army Chief of Staff, troop numbers had surged to a peak of 535,000. On April the 28th of 1967, he delivered a pivotal address to a joint session of Congress. He emphasized the importance of the nation's resolve, stating, "In evaluating the enemy strategy, it is evident to me that he believes our Achilles heel is our resolve." Westmoreland stressed the crucial role of unwavering support from the American people, saying, "Your continued strong support is vital to the success of our mission." He highlighted key qualities needed for success, including resolve, confidence, patience, determination, and ongoing support. Westmoreland expressed confidence in prevailing over the communist threat in Vietnam, declaring backed at home by resolve, confidence, patience, determination, and continued support, "We will prevail in Vietnam over the communist aggressor." He also asserted that under his leadership, U.S. forces had emerged victorious in every battle. The war's turning point, according to Westmoreland, came with the 1968 Tet Offensive, during which Communist forces launched attacks across South Vietnam cities and towns. At that time, Westmoreland's focus was on the Battle of Khe Sanh, and he viewed the Tet Offensive as a diversionary tactic aimed at drawing attention away from key strategic objectives. Attrition versus guerrilla warfare. It's a bit of a puzzle whether Khe Sanh was meant to distract during the Tet Offensive or the other way around. Some call it the Khe Sanh mystery. Either way, American and South Vietnamese troops managed to fend off the attacks during the Tet Offensive, and the Communist forces suffered heavy losses. However, the intensity of the assault shook people's confidence in Westmoreland's earlier assurances about the war's status. This led to debates in politics and changes in public opinion, which eventually caused the Johnson administration to put a limit on increasing U.S. troops in Vietnam. About 9 months later, when news of the My Lai massacre broke, Westmoreland opposed efforts by the incoming Nixon administration to cover it up. Instead, he pushed for a thorough investigation led by Lieutenant General William R. Pierce. Interestingly, just a few days after the tragedy, he had praised the same unit involved for their outstanding job in killing 128 communists during a fierce battle. After 1969, Westmoreland also took steps to investigate the Phong Ni and Phong Nhat massacre, which happened a year earlier. He believed that the Vietnamese communists could be defeated by waging a war of attrition, essentially wearing down the Vietnam People's Army so they couldn't fight anymore. His strategy relied heavily on using artillery and air power, as well as trying to lure the communists into big battles where the U.S. had the upper hand in firepower and technology. However, the North Vietnamese Army and the National Liberation Front of South Vietnam had their own plans. They kept the war as a guerrilla fight, avoiding major battles and denying the Americans the chance to use their strengths effectively. This strategy also aimed to erode American public support for the war faster. Despite suggestions from people like John Paul Vann and Lew Walt to switch to a pacification approach, Westmoreland stuck to his attrition strategy. He struggled to convince President Johnson to expand the war into Cambodia and Laos to cut off the Ho Chi Minh Trail, but he couldn't rely on the argument that widening the war was necessary for victory. Instead, he focused on what he called positive indicators, which turned out to be misleading when the Tet Offensive took everyone by surprise. This event overshadowed all of his talk of positive signs and caused a drop in U.S. support for the war. Even though the Communists suffered heavy losses at Khe Sanh and during the Tet Offensive, and the United States and South Vietnam were in a stronger military position in early 1968, the political fallout and public panic from the Tet Offensive weakened backing for the war. The Quiet Controversy. In June of 1968, things took a turn for General Westmoreland when General Creighton Adams stepped into his shoes. This switch-up came right after the Tet Offensive shook things up. While the decision had been in the works since late 1967, the media spun it as a bit of a slap on the wrist for not being fully prepared for the communist attack. After that, Westmoreland took on the role of Chief of Staff of the United States Army from 1968 to 1972. In 1970, during his time as Chief of Staff, he responded to the My Lai massacre by U.S. Army forces by launching an investigation. This deep dive into the leadership during the Vietnam War revealed a troubling trend of officers straying from the Army's core values of duty, honor, and country. This report, known as the Study on Military Professionalism, had a big impact on Army policies. One noticeable change was Westmoreland's decision to extend the service duration of officers in Vietnam beyond just 6 months, aiming to improve stability. However, to keep a lid on the negative findings, he kept the report under wraps within the Army for 2 years, only sharing it after he retired in 1972. Some military historians note that Westmoreland took the reins as Chief of Staff during a tough period for the Army, especially as it shifted to an all-volunteer force. He tried to make Army life more appealing to young Americans, allowing things like sideburns and beer in the mess hall, although not everyone was on board with these changes, labeling them as too lenient. After a stint in the Army, Westmoreland dipped into politics, running for governor of South Carolina in 1974, albeit unsuccessfully. He also penned his autobiography and got involved in improving education standards in South Carolina. At one point, he even caught the eye of Time magazine as a potential contender for the 1968 Republican presidential nomination. The legal battles. Back in 1986, Westmoreland got a pretty big honor. He was chosen as the Grand Marshal for the Chicago Vietnam Veterans Parade. It was a huge event with around 200,000 Vietnam veterans and over 500,000 people showing up to watch. This parade did a lot to mend the rift between Vietnam vets and the American public. Around that time, Mike Wallace had a chat with Westmoreland for a CBS special called The Uncounted Enemy, a Vietnam Deception. This documentary, which aired on January the 23rd of 1982 and was mostly put together by CBS producer George Crowell III, made some serious claims. It said that Westmoreland and others had purposely downplayed how many Viet Cong soldiers there were in 1967. They did this to keep up morale among U.S. troops and keep support for the war strong back home. Westmoreland wasn't happy about what the documentary said. He sued CBS, including Wallace, for saying things about him that he believed were lies. This turned into a long legal battle. But then, during the trial, something surprising happened. Westmoreland and CBS settled suddenly. He got an apology, which was pretty much what CBS had offered from the start. Some folks think that the judge's instructions to the jury about proving that CBS acted with actual malice in saying those things about Westmoreland made his lawyers worry that they were going to lose the case. Others think the settlement happened after two of Westmoreland's old intelligence officers, Major General Joseph McChristian and Colonel Gaines Hawkins, backed up the main points of the documentary. These points were about Westmoreland challenging intelligence reports about Viet Cong troop numbers for political reasons. There's still a lot of debate about whether CBS's editors did the right thing. According to a statement by McChristian, his team had better intel on the number of irregular Viet Cong fighters just before he left Vietnam on a regular rotation. These numbers worried Westmoreland because he thought the media wouldn't understand them. He didn't tell anyone to change the numbers, but decided not to include them in reports to Washington, thinking they weren't suitable for sharing. Looking back at everything later, it seems clear that Westmoreland couldn't prove CBS wrong in court. The main claim CBS made was that he made intelligence officers hide the truth. Westmoreland was furious because the broadcast hinted that he was being dishonest and telling others to lie. During the intense trial, Mike Wallace ended up in the hospital with depression. Despite all the legal battles, Westmoreland and his wife even sent him flowers. Wallace's memoir is mostly understanding toward Westmoreland, although he makes it clear they disagreed on Vietnam War issues and Nixon's policies in Southeast Asia. Westmoreland's views on life and war. Back in 1998, during an interview with George magazine, Westmoreland didn't hold back when talking about his rival, North Vietnamese General Vo Nguyen Giap. He basically said, yeah, Giap was tough, but he made some big mistakes. Westmoreland felt Giap stuck to old-school tactics that cost his own soldiers dearly. By early 1969, Giap had reportedly lost around 500,000 soldiers, a massive loss. Westmoreland thought this showed Giap wasn't a military genius, just someone who didn't value human life enough. Then there's this 1974 movie where Westmoreland made a controversial comment about how Westerners and Asians see life differently. He seemed to suggest that Westerners care more about life and dignity, but not everyone agreed with him. Nick Terse, who wrote a book about the Vietnam War, argued that many of the Vietnamese who died were innocent civilians, not enemy soldiers caught in the crossfire. Terse also accused Westmoreland of hiding the truth about what really happened from the public when he was in charge. Even after all the criticism, Westmoreland stood by his belief that the U.S. didn't lose the Vietnam War. He thought they just didn't fully support South Vietnam. This view got him into hot water with historians and experts who saw things differently. Westmoreland's personal life had its share of tragedies as well. Shortly after taking on a big role in the Army, his brother-in-law died in Vietnam. Westmoreland himself lived a long life, passing away in 2005 due to Alzheimer's. He was laid to rest with military honors, and various awards and memorials now honor his legacy, including the General William C. Westmoreland Bridge and an annual award recognizing SAR veterans' contributions.